The Australian and New Zealand New Wave cinematic movements started around the 1970s. While the Australian New Wave was fostered with an increase in government funding, the New Zealand New Wave was cultivated by the need for content, with the invention of television and the need to speak out about socio-political hardships. Both of these movements have made an extremely large mark on the film world, with movies like Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Piano, which I will go into detail on later. Those movies were directed by two innovative creators who are strongly associated with the Australian and the New Zealand New Wave. Their names are Jane Campion and Peter Weir. Jane Campion is a filmmaker from New Zealand. She has directed groundbreaking films like The Piano and An Angel at My Table. Her films show the beginnings of a country, the beauty of life in that country, and just how isolated the characters can feel in an expansive yet not fully inhabited land. She shows the interactions between the colonizers and the Maori and how colonial structures are very flawed based on how they treat women and different economic classes. Peter Weir is a director from Australia. He made his mark on the Australian New Wave with films such as Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Last Wave. These films are also focused on the country that is Australia, but more in a weary way. Australian New Wave films show fear of the land, the unforgiveness of it. They touch on the more psychological and surreal subjects. His films also touch on the interactions between colonizers and Aboriginal people. Both of these directors exemplified their cinematic movements with flying colors. This video argues that the Australian and New Zealand New Wave cinematic movements helped define their countries in the film world and tell their stories to the general public through the use of the land and people living on it in a groundbreaking and original way. As I mentioned in the intro, the Australian New Wave was fostered with an increase in government funding with the Australian Film Development Corporation, or the AFDC. This new wave lasted nearly 2 decades, and around 400 films were made. A little bit later in the wave, 1975 to be exact, the Australian Film Commission, or the AFC, was born. This brought about the films I'm going to talk about: Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Last Wave. These films focus on more artistic aspects of Australian culture, which is something the AFC encouraged. Peter Weir, the director of Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Last Wave, was born in Australia. He lived at Camp Cove from the age of 8 to 12 years old. He was born in 1944 and pursued sports, games, movies, and collecting comic books as a kid. He went to Vaucluse High School and Scots College. When he was 21, he took a ship to England to ultimately pursue filmmaking, and he ended up making his first film when he returned to Australia in 1966. Here's a quick quote on what Weir said about filmmaking in Australia at the start of government funding. "We made them by hook and by crook, and the government people said, 'Let's back these guys and get the industry going again.'" Picnic at Hanging Rock is one of Weir's most famous films, and it is a really amazing example of what Australian New Wave films are. In this film, a group of girls goes missing, and then what follows is the main aspect of the film. It shows the land and the people who live in it, and the way the land feels psychologically to these characters. It's unknown and confusing. Here's a quote from Weir on making the movie. "I had to find a way of recording on film the enchantment that I had experienced as a reader, rather like a composer has to find the music to transfer a libretto into an opera. To me, Picnic at Hanging Rock enchanted me as a viewer, so I think Weir succeeded in his rendition. The scene where the girl is screaming Miranda is not only iconic, but also hauntingly captivating. There was truly nothing those girls could do to resist the numinous rock." The Last Wave is pretty different from Picnic at Hanging Rock, but it still deals with similar themes. The film follows a lawyer who is given the assignment to defend a group of Aboriginal people accused of murder. Through this journey, he has visions and premonitions about the destruction of Australia. The movie also touches on the relationships between Aboriginal people and colonizers, and how that plays out. there is a psychological connection to the land that both of these movies demonstrate. You can also see Weir's aesthetic in both of these films, in the way he shows the land and how the people interact with it. In the final scene, with the wave encroaching towards Sydney, we can really see how the environment is a seemingly unbending force that everyone living on it has to submit to. Both of these films exemplify the Australian New Wave. The way the land connects with the people, the psychological aspects of that, the unknowing and almost fear of the land, this is what makes these films and this movement stand out. The New Zealand New Wave is different from the Australian New Wave because it was cultivated by the need for content with the invention of television and the need to speak out about socio-political hardships. Jane Campion is one of the biggest filmmakers to come out of this movement, and one of the biggest female filmmakers in the world. Jane was born in 1954 in Wellington, New Zealand. In an interview at the Locarno Film Festival, Jane says, "I've always been sensitive to atmosphere, and the landscape really creates atmosphere for me. It sets the mood and tone." Similar to the Australian New Wave, the New Zealand New Wave really delves into atmosphere and the connection to the land. Jane Campion really grabs that by the neck in her films. It's awe-inspiring. The Piano is a masterpiece created by Campion in 1993. She won so many awards for this film, it would take me longer than a minute to list them. The Piano follows a Scottish mother and daughter as they are shipped away to New Zealand for the mother's arranged marriage. This movie shows the dangers of colonialism and the way they treat women and the class structures they uphold, the juxtaposition of the colonial way and the unruly land, and the way the Maori and colonizers live in early New Zealand. The connection to the land and the way Campion shows it is what exemplifies New Zealand's New Wave to me the most in this movie. The land is muddy and harsh, but it's also beautiful. The movie would not be as impactful without the environment. One scene that really shows this is when Ada, the mother, gets her finger cut off. She struggles to walk away, but then soon succumbs to the mud. It shows the unforgiveness of the land. An Angel at My Table is an autobiographical movie about a New Zealand writer named Janet Frame. This movie follows her through 3 stages of her life. Throughout her life, she spent time in the psychiatric ward and was misdiagnosed with schizophrenia. You can really see how her life is different, inside and out of the ward, with the use of cinematography and environment. A scene where the use of environment and connection to the land really shines and shows what the New Zealand New Wave is about is when she is a child and singing on the beach with her friends. The scene is so beautiful and nostalgic, like the calm before the storm. These 2 films exemplify the New Zealand New Wave, with its connection to the environment and its beauty, but also its vastness and isolation, and how that impacts characters' psyches. In conclusion, through these films and their impact, I can confidently say the Australian and New Zealand New Wave cinematic movements helped to define their countries in the film world and tell their stories to the general public through the use of the land and the people living on it in a groundbreaking and original way. In my opinion, no other movement touches on the environment and psychological aspects like these 2. It truly makes them stand out against the rest.